Next on Enviro Close-Up, the new push for nuclear power. Nuclear power is again being pushed by the U.S. government and the nuclear industry. Actor Alec Baldwin understands nuclear power well. He's from Long Island, like I am, and he was very involved in opposing a scheme by the utility on Long Island, the Long Island Lighting Company, and Brookhaven National Laboratory, a U.S. government laboratory, to build 7 to 11 nuclear power plants on Long Island. One was built, Shoreham, it never operated. Ultimately, because of citizen and local government pressure, the scheme was stopped. Now, here's Alec addressing in 2018 the Radiation and Public Health Project.
I've never seen an industry in my life make more excuses for their
flaws.
Well, but I want to, but for their criminal behavior in terms of their corporate citizenship. And every time you turn around, they just want more excuses and more excuses why they don't do the things that they were forced to do by law, they promised to do. And now, thank God these things are closing, and more of them are going to close. But you can bet they're going to try to hand ratepayers the bill. Hey, listen, again, we all know these things, but just as a perspective, I'm from Long Island and grew up on Long Island. And when Shoreham was there, and they said, if we throw that switch and we put the rods in the pool and we turn the reactor on, it's going to cost you so much more money to shut this thing down. It's like a game of chicken. And they said, boom, they threw the switch, the rods went in the pool, the thing went hot, and they said, you want us to shut it down now? It's going to cost you like 5 or 10 or 20 times more than it might have. And they said, you want us to shut it down now? And the ratepayers on Long Island said, yeah, we do. And we're going to eat the cost. And they amortized the cost against who were already the highest ratepayers in the 48 states. They made them pay. Long Island Lilco ratepayers were the highest electrical rates in the country. And they added to that burden and paid even more to shut down Shoreham, to close down Shoreham, because they just didn't want it there. And that's how they got that's how people in this room got BNL, because it was the evacuation plan. And we were all like, by the way, there's a reactor at Brookhaven National Laboratory. And Brookhaven was like, damn, they remembered. They remembered we had a reactor here, the HFBR. And they made them shut that down. You know, and my point is, they always want to pass on the cost to the ratepayer. They always want people, like this idea that they're going to guarantee a stock price. Of course, Murphy, who I supported, but I was appalled to see that Murphy, he was a Goldman Sachs, he's a banker. Of course, he wanted to guarantee, who the owner is, Exelon?
Yes.
PSE, he wanted to guarantee them, their investors, some return on their money by guaranteeing this thing be done. I just want to say, things are bad. They remain bad. Much of what we want done does not happen. Much of what we would call a victory slips through our fingers. We don't get what we want. But I can't imagine how much worse it would be if it weren't for us and organizations like this. And I think that we need to do is, just because we won, or just because we lost, and Murphy went and did this thing, don't take the pressure off him. Make a list of the things you think should happen now. Make a list of the things that we demand happen now, and let's send that as a follow-up to the Asbury Park Press and to these journalists. Let's do some talk shows and get on the air and talk about, well, we lost this one, but in the coming months, this will happen, and this will happen, and this is what we believe is in the best interests of the people in this area, particularly in New Jersey. I mean, obviously, Indian Point is a huge problem for us, 35 miles outside of New York. But I just want to close with saying that, I work in the movie business and the TV business, which is one of the most toxifying businesses in the world. But I mean, every time they make a film, the energy consumption and the raw materials they use, they build sets and they just light a match and burn them when they're done. There's really no sense of how awful the motion picture and television business is in terms of how toxic it is and what it does. And I think the only thing that's worse is, or in my mind, there are some that are worse, but among the ones that are the worst are this nuclear utility business. When we found out that car companies had to make changes and we put that pressure on them, those changes came. And there were wonderful things that resulted from that. There's wonderful things that resulted from emissions standards being raised the way they were. And car companies still fight those even now. They're trying to turn them back now that they've got this sociopath in the White House. They want to turn back those rates even more. Of tobacco companies, it's a line. It's a line of these corporate citizens who, you know, they just want to walk right over a pile of dead bodies to their board meeting, you know. Tobacco industry, automobile industry, gun manufacturers, I think, are kind of in people's sights now, but that's thanks to young people, not to any of us, really, or not largely to any of us. And the nuclear power industry, which is dying. They're dying. And they want to make sure that they die the way they want to die, and that everybody gets rich in the process. And we need to talk, starting today, starting now, of what the media strategy is now to keep holding their feet to the fire. What do we want to happen now? What do we want to have happen? And don't stop pulling the covers on Murphy. Don't take the pressure off Murphy. You want to keep saying, you know, Murphy, Goldman Sachs guy, money guy. Of course, he took care of his friends in the banking industry with this this investment thing. Don't stop telling the truth. You know, don't stop telling the truth. I want to thank Joe, and I'm going to eat just a little bit more. So.
There's been a saying, you can't fight City Hall, and some say that myth was created by City Hall. In fact, you can fight City Hall and nuclear power successfully. Here's Janet Tauro. She is the board chair of Clean Water Action of New Jersey, telling how the Oyster Creek nuclear plant is to be closed imminently because of citizen action. How did you manage to get Oyster Creek shut down?
It was a many-pronged attack. It was citizens, it was legal, it was government, it was 400 blows. It wasn't really just one thing. We organized around various themes. There was the health issue, there was the safety issue, and there was the environmental issue. And we fought on all of those fronts simultaneously. That's citizens. Now, for each piece of that, it required something different. For the safety issues, we had to fight the NRC, so we needed a lot of legal backup. For the environmental issues and the destruction of Barnegat Bay, we needed to have state regulators and state legislators on our side. And for the safety, environmental, and health, we had Joe Mangano and his fantastic research that he did. And we just made sure that we got it out there. We were relentless. We went to every single hearing. We went to every single meeting. We staged meetings. And we, of course, Alec Baldwin and Christy Brinkley, we owe a huge gratitude to, because they publicized this. That's how I even learned that there was a nuclear reactor in Lacey Township called Oyster Creek. I learned that from Alec Baldwin and Christy Brinkley coming to the Jersey Shore and doing a program at Ocean County College. So tremendous debt of gratitude, and then just a lot of organizing. And
Joe Mangano and his radiation and public health project?
Yes.
What did they reveal? What did they disclose about health and Oyster Creek?
Well, what happened was I actually was at a Mommy and Me program at the local library. And that's where you go, and it's Mommy and Me, and you read books. My children were very small. And I saw a box where you check out the books, where the librarian is. And it said, we're collecting teeth for this tooth fairy project. And it said to measure the effects of radiation from Oyster Creek. And it dawned on me, oh my goodness, Oyster Creek, that's that nuclear plant that Alec Baldwin and Christy Brinkley were talking about. So I went home, I told my husband, and he said, well, yeah, let's give the teeth. So I had baby teeth from my children, and took it back to the library, put it in the box, and, was appalled when those results came in. And it showed that children in Ocean County had elevated levels of strontium-90 in their teeth. And that's when the war began. That's when the battle began.
The successful fight against Oyster Creek, what can people all over the country, all over the world learn from it?
We never said anything that wasn't true. Everything was factual, everything was backed up with facts, and we relentlessly put it out there. And we put it out there, like I said, in these public hearings and meetings, letters to the editor, talking to every journalist we knew, talking to the radio station, talking to elected officials, relentless. And once you know these bad things are happening that can make your family sick, you can't not do it. So you just have to keep doing it.
The Trump administration is in a full throttle attack on the environment, on environmental regulations, and pushing hard for nuclear power. Amy Goldsmith, New Jersey State Director of Clean Water Action, explains what's happening. The attack on the environment by the Trump administration. Your views on it, what's happening?
Well, Clean Water Action is sort of at the front line on a number of different issues. We work on water, but energy, like nuclear power issues. Basically what the EPA and under the leadership of Pruitt is basically doing everything they can to dismantle the regulations, to not enforce the regulations, to take whatever science was built up within the agency and either deep six it, put it in a closet, lock the door on science, so that decisions that are made are not made on the basis of science and fact, but are made on the basis of favors, polluters, not doing the enforcement that needs to be done, trying to take away the money from the agency that's so desperately needed to do the groundwork in the states, in the communities. Without the resources of the state and the federal government working in partnership with each other, they can't do the work to protect ourselves from Superfund sites, from radiation poisoning, from working together with agencies to make sure the work is done. And for the state of New Jersey is just one example of where if the DEP budget is not met with federal dollars, the State Department of Environmental Protection basically loses half of its funding. The other half of its funding comes from the federal government and comes from the EPA, from a variety of grants and other programs. So if they don't actually administer those programs and they don't actually put that money in the budget, the states can't do the work that needs to be done because they don't have those matching dollars.
What will this mean, essentially the destruction of EPA for the health of people in New Jersey, for the lives of people all over the United States?
Well, New Jersey has the most number of Superfund sites, over 100 Superfund sites. These are the most toxic waste sites in the nation, but many other states have the same problem. It's just they haven't discovered the problems yet. They don't have the resources to discover them. But also, a lot of work has been done by my organization and others to protect our drinking water, to protect us from coal ash, from power plants. And by not doing those things, we end up having more diesel pollution on our streets. We don't take the measures we need to at our ports. We end up with contaminated drinking water. And the thing about pollution is that we don't have little flags in our body that tells us, oh, we're sick, or we got cancer, or we have asthma because of this, that, or the other thing. And that's the beauty of the beast. That's the beauty of pollution, right? You don't have flags unless you have asbestosis. You get white lung disease from that. Most cancers and other things are, unidentifiable. And it's the cumulative impact of what we experience day in and day out. And if you live in a lower income community, you live in a community of color, with even less resources, your impact is even greater, and there's no end in sight, and there's no remedy for them if, in fact, government is not looking out for us and protecting us against polluters.
What should people do about Trump and Pruitt and Zinke and this cast of characters?
Well, you know, even though the administration in Washington is trying to undo all of these things, the laws have not all been undone. You can't do it like that and snap your finger and all of a sudden these regulations disappear. There actually is a process. It takes several years. So in some cases, there are organizations that are working with community groups to sue the federal government to stop them. In some cases, it's states that are joining together to stop the federal government from undoing the Clean Water Act, the Clean Air Act, and other things. And the other thing is there are lots of people working at their local level, whether it's a big city like New York City or a little town like my town. They're adopting their own policies. They're going to, address climate change at the local level if they can't get the federal government to do it. The other thing is that Congress, we could flip the House in Congress if people actually focus their energy on races and places around the country, and if we could actually have Congress tempering the White House, it would make a difference. And so people need to get out to vote, people need to take action, people need to do whatever they can to pass the ordinances and policies that need to be done at the local and the state level when the federal government is walking the wrong way.
With Trump and Pruitt and these other scoundrels, are they ignorant or are they corrupt or both?
Well, I think they're very deliberate. I think they've been planning this out for a long time. I can't speak for Trump, but Pruitt has a long history of suing the EPA on anything that he can in order to undo the laws that control, fossil fuel industry. And so I think it's a well thought out strategy to try and undo government and to undo, the rules and regulations that do protect us. There is a role for government, and the role for government is to protect our health and the environment and protect us from, what's going to come. It's climate change. It's already here.
Meanwhile, there's been an effort to bail out old, decrepit nuclear power plants. Susan Shapiro is an attorney fighting such a scheme in the state of New York.
Apparently there was a deal that has given Exelon $7.6 billion of ratepayer money for the next 12 years to keep 4 nuclear power plants operational upstate New York. We don't know whether that money was actually needed. They never looked at the finances as to whether there was a need. They changed the standard that is normally used if you're going to subsidize a company, an energy company, from the cost of operations to a brand new concept that's based on that nuclear somehow now is good for the environment, that it's environmentally a benefit, and that it's called the social cost of carbon, and they're basing it on this concept that's a brand new concept, and it increased the amount from a few billion to $7.6 billion, and they literally inserted themselves into the clean energy standard, which was designed for renewables, to fund renewables, and now renewables in the program are dwarfed by the amount the nukes are getting. So renewables are not going to make it in New York. They're getting $1 billion over 10 years, and you got the nuclear plants getting $7.6 billion of our ratepayer money. We're not making a transition to clean energy. They're claiming it's some sort of bridge to clean energy. And the biggest fraud of the whole thing is they're calling nuclear zero emissions. And based on the claim that nuclear is zero emissions, that's why they're financing, that's why we, all the ratepayers in New York State, are paying $7.6 billion. There are no exemptions for anyone, even if you were an early adopter of renewable energy. There's no exemptions for anyone. Everyone has to pay this money and has already paid it. In the last year, we've already paid $480 million to Exelon. And it's one company that's receiving, one foreign, out-of-state company that's receiving all this money. This is a new paradigm that the nuclear industry has created. It's a new PR campaign that nuclear is, zero emissions, and therefore they should get subsidies. It's not just happening here in New York, it's happening all over the country, but we are the only case that has survived. There's been other legal challenges that have been brought, but all the other cases have been dismissed. We have not been dismissed. 5 of our petitioners, of 56 of petitioners, got through, and the judge are allowing us now to go forward on the merits of the case. And so that's where we are right now. We're in the middle of drafting our reply briefs. We need to hire some expert witnesses to come on board, and we're fundraising as well, but that's where we are.
Now, Governor Andrew Cuomo of New York he's arranged for the shutdown of the Indian Point nuclear power plants. Why, if he is against Indian Point operating, and that's just about 35 miles north of Times Square, would he be allowing these 4 nuclear plants further upstate, near some big cities, however, to continue to operate?
This is my personal belief for closure of Indian Point, which is not what everyone says it is. It's not closing in 21 and 20. It's closing in 24, 25. They already got their licenses till then. They'll keep operational till then. We will all soon be paying the subsidy to Indian Point as well to keep them open, because they've already said we financially are not viable anymore. That's all they have to say is we're not financially viable. But we do know a lobbyist from Exelon proudly announced with slides that show money going down a toilet drain that they spent $500 million, 110 to buy Fitzpatrick and $400 million for lobbying, and they're getting this windfall 750% return on their investment. Isn't that great? And it's acknowledged that there were many, many phone calls prior to this deal going through. We know that it started with Andrew Cuomo in January of 2016, writing a letter saying, I want nuclear included in the Clean Energy Standard. Nuclear was never ever considered as part of the Clean Energy Standard. It was never part of any proposal. It had actually been removed from prior drafts. And now suddenly nuclear is basically the elephant in the room, taking the lion's share of the money, and is going to really dwarf renewables and kill renewables in New York State. That's really what the end game is. I believe the end game of this whole PR campaign, this whole push for all these subsidies, is to kill renewables.
Now, it's $7.6 billion now that is to be raised in the next 12 years. If you throw Indian Point in, it could be more than $10 billion.
Easily.
How is it going to be raised from ratepayers, including businesses and nonprofits and schools in New York State? How is it going to work?
Well, they said it was going to be a surcharge and that we were going to see it separated on our bills, but it's already been inputted right into the rate. So everyone in New York knows that their rates went up last year. They went up by at least $2 a month minimum. That's what they're claiming, $2 a month. We believe it's quite a bit higher a month. Certainly for businesses, it's a lot higher. And that's how they're raising the money. It's already in our rate. It's not supposed to be. It's supposed to be a surcharge so you can see it and identify it, but they just slipped it into the rate.
Can the bailout now be stopped?
It can be stopped if we win this lawsuit. We believe not only was the bailout, the substance of the bailout wrong, but the procedure by which they did the bailout was sloppy. It was a rush. They didn't allow for public comment. They changed the standards at the last minute, and they didn't allow for public comment because Exelon said you have to close it by a certain date. And they made the entire deal contingent on the sale of Fitzpatrick. So it's very obvious when you really dig into it that this was done for the benefit of Exelon and at the behest of Exelon.
You don't need a catastrophic accident for nuclear power to cause illness and death. Joseph Mangano, executive director of the Radiation and Public Health Project, explains that by routine operation alone, nuclear power plants kill and cause injury.
Over time, it seems like the greatest health concern from nuclear reactors has been catastrophic meltdowns, like at Chernobyl and Fukushima and 3 Mile Islands. Even though that's true, that doesn't mean you need a meltdown to threaten the health of people living near reactors. And this is because when a reactor operates on an ongoing basis, it creates over 100 man-made radioactive cancer-causing chemicals. A lot of it is stored as waste. However, some of it, as a condition of operating a reactor, is released into the environment, into the air, and the water, and thus into the food chain and people's bodies. And what are the health consequences of it? The group Radiation and Public Health Project was founded in 1989 really to address this very question, because in all the years of operating nuclear reactors, which began in the 1940s, there had only been one national study of cancer near nuclear plants. And we felt this was done purposely to hide potentially high levels of cancer. Since then, our group has published 37 medical journal articles, 8 books, and done 29 press conferences on this particular topic. To summarize what we found, in most cases near nuclear plants, we find that when you open a nuclear plant, the cancer rate in the local area increases. We also found that when nuclear plants close, in the first year or two, there's an immediate and definite decline in infant deaths and cancer cases in children 4 and under. These are the ones who are the most sensitive to a dose of radiation, the fetus, the infant, and the young child. We also have gone out and done the only study of testing how much radiation is in people's bodies. We call this the Tooth Fairy Project, which sounds like a fun exercise, but it's really a serious piece of science. It's been done by other groups going back to the 1950s. And we went out and collected 5,000 baby teeth and sent them to a laboratory where they tested them for one of the 100+ chemicals called strontium-90, which doesn't exist in nature. You only find them when you explode an atomic bomb or you run a nuclear reactor. And the 5,000 teeth were mostly near 6 nuclear plants. We found that from the late 80s to the early 80s to the late 90s, the amount of strontium-90 went up about 50%. We found that the closer you got to a nuclear plant, the levels of strontium-90 were about 40% higher than in areas away from any plant. And we also found a link with childhood cancer near several plants. When the strontium-90 rate went up, the childhood cancer rate went up. When the strontium-90 rate went down, the childhood cancer rate went down. 2 lines on a graph that look almost identical. So really that is the biggest contribution I think Radiation and Public Health Project has made. That yes, a meltdown is a great concern, but while we're waiting for a meltdown that hopefully will never happen, people are in fact being harmed, and thus we need to adjust policies to reduce the amount of radiation being released and really to close reactors.
This has been Karl Grossman saying the way to deal with nuclear power is to shut nuclear plants down immediately.